In one of the most iconic moments of Hideo Kojima's 1998 seminal masterpiece, Metal Gear Solid, Dr. Hal Otacon Emmerich asks the protagonist, Solid Snake, "Do you think love can bloom on a battlefield?" One would assume that the iconicism of this line is derived from its overbearing sincerity, and one would probably be correct. Though for me, digging into this line and using it as a prism to view the rest of the series through feels like a far more constructive idea than just passing it off as an odd Kojima-ism. Recently, whilst replaying the original MGS title, that silly little line never removed itself from the experience in my mind, and I started to tune in to that theme of love and warfare. By the time my playthrough was over, I had become obsessed with the idea and couldn't help myself but to go back and similarly replay the second game in the series, Sons of Liberty, all the while keeping that concept and line of dialogue firmly in the front of my mind. So, after 30 hours of play, hundreds of hours of thinking and writing, and a mind now steeped in anti-war sentiment and conspiratorial ramblings, I present you with this, a detailed look at the themes of love, sex, and romance in Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. Metal Gear Solid 1 is a narrative steeped in cliché and trope. Now, I don't mean this as an insult to the game that quite rightly has come to be viewed as a masterpiece of the 5th console generation. Conversely, I bring this up to establish the near post-ironic tone the game achieves with its archetypal characters and relationships. The story of MGS1 sees protagonist Solid Snake being sent to Shadow Moses Island to take down and thwart the plans of terrorist group Sons of Big Boss, led by Liquid Snake, the man with the same codename as you. The terrorists are threatening to launch a nuke from the top secret weapon Metal Gear Rex, unless the US government hand over the remains of legendary war hero Big Boss. I know that's a lot to take in right now, especially for those of you who haven't played the game, but do not fret, as these details will be reiterated at their relevant points, and the finer plot points will rarely come up in our discussions of the characters and their relationships. This applies for both games covered today. Solid Snake is an amalgamation of various Hollywood stars and their action movie roles from the 1980s. With body and head inspired by Jean-Claude Van Damme and Christopher Walken respectively, and the character's name and personality lifted straight from Kurt Russell's Snake Pliskin character in 1981's Escape from New York. As per 80s action movie cliché, the super soldier Snake starts off in the narrative emotionally closed off to pretty much all other characters, with his mind solely focused on the mission at hand. It's only when Snake stumbles upon the naive yet determined and fiery Meryl Silverburr that his more emotional or even human side starts to shine through, though definitely not immediately. Meryl is a young, idealistic soldier, new to the US government's Foxhound unit. Though, unfortunately for her, the first day on the job saw her new unit being taken over by the Sons of Big Boss terrorists, and turned against the government she signed up to serve. Meryl refuses to take part in her company's rebellion, and is subsequently imprisoned within the Shadow Moses base, though an equally naive guard named Johnny lets Meryl out of her cell, and she begins to sneak around the base, same as Snake. These two thematically opposed characters finally properly meet about 2 hours into the game. And in the women's bathroom, no less.
That's the second time I've been able to sneak up on the legendary Solid Snake.
You're Meryl? There's no way you could pass for a man for long.
What do you mean? Hey, men aren't allowed in here.
I had no idea you were so feminine.
This is no time to try and hit on me, Snake. Besides, it's a waste of time. When I joined up, they gave me psychotherapy to destroy my interest in men.
Same smart mouth. You're Meryl, all right. Are you hurt?
Not yet. After all, I was disguised as a genome soldier.
So why'd you change? You'd be a lot better off dressed like one of them.
I got tired of disguising myself. The truth is, the uniform smelled like blood.
What's that mark?
Huh? Oh, this? It's a paint tattoo. It's not real. I was a fan of Foxhound way back, and guys like you and my uncle were in it. None of that gene therapy like there is today. You guys were real heroes.
There are no heroes in war. All the heroes I know are either dead or in prison. One or the other.
But Snake, you're a hero, aren't you?
I'm just a man who's good at what he does. Killing. There's no winning or losing for a mercenary. The only winners in war are the people.
That's right, and you fight for the people.
I've never fought for anyone but myself. I've got no purpose in life, no ultimate goal.
Come on.
It's only when I'm cheating death on the battlefield. The only time I feel truly alive.
Seeing other people die makes you feel alive, huh? You love war and don't want it to stop? Is it the same with all great soldiers throughout history?
Why didn't you contact me?
My codec was broken.
Is that all?
Shouldn't you just be happy we met up like this? How did you recognize me in disguise?
I never forget a lady.
So there's something you like about me, huh?
Yeah, you've got a great butt.
Oh, I see. First it's my eyes, now it's my butt. What's next?
On the battlefield, you never think about what's next.
Within this now iconic scene of the two meeting, Meryl, the more open and emotionally readable character, stands half naked in a vest and underwear, nothing to hide. While Snake, who is closed off and seemingly devoid of emotion up until this point, is wearing a full-body sneaking suit with his skin almost completely covered, his protection. At first, Snake tries to flirt with or even slightly neg Meryl, but both she and the player can tell that he only does this to boost his own ego and masculinity. Meryl explains that his attempts are futile. She says that when she joined Foxhound, she was given psychotherapy to destroy her interest in men. Though, as we'll come to understand later, this therapy could not have been successful, as she does eventually start a romance with our protagonist. The failure of this therapy implies that Meryl's emotional capacity is far too powerful to subdue, while Snake consciously self-inflicts emotional numbness seemingly successfully. Not even experimental government mind-altering can contain the potential for love inside Meryl's heart. As the story goes on, it will be this emotional viscerality provided by Meryl that will slowly soften Snake's cold and unemotional core, and will be the catalyst for his admittedly cliché but brilliantly effective character arc. Also within this scene, we begin to see one of the series' most integral and compelling thematic arguments, that of the romanticization of war and combat. In this context, romance does not refer to love or anything sexual, but instead it denotes the idealization and glorification of a concept. Hell yeah! In the bathroom, Meryl explains that she used to look up to the members of Foxhound, including Snake and her uncle, Colonel Campbell. She saw them as real heroes. Snake, almost embodying the voice of the author, explains to her the cold truth, that there are no real heroes in war, that he sees himself as a mercenary hired to kill, and that he only ever feels alive on the battlefield. Meryl seemingly can't accept this. She has been indoctrinated into the romantic narrative of noble warfare her whole life, and only someone such as Snake, who has seen the harsh reality of combat, can possibly help her see this truth. Though, it'll take a little more than a monologue to convince her. In a sense, however, no one can blame Meryl for her ideological naivete. She tells the player and Snake that her entire family was military, and that she only became a soldier to get closer to her father. She denies her own femininity in pursuit of becoming the ideal soldier, and when she says that she feels more comfortable with a gun than a bra, she lets up that she's made this decision consciously to get closer to the men in her life. Snake, on the other hand, had this more emotional side of himself ripped from him. He made no decision, but instead his humanity was stripped away from years of bloody combat. So when he tells Meryl to basically run for the hills, he means it. He can see the emotional potential within her and doesn't want it to be corroded in the same way his was. Despite all of the passive-aggressive and sexually charged quips the two characters throw back and forth, Meryl and Snake quickly team up in the narrative, and before long are confronted with the game's most iconic and memorable boss, Psycho Mantis. The mind-altering, gas mask-wearing, bondage-themed memory card reader Psycho Mantis gives us a lot of food for thought regarding Snake and Meryl's relationship at this early point in the game. When he takes over the mind of Meryl to toy with Snake, he makes her sexually proposition the soldier.
Like me. Hold me, Snake.
What's wrong?
Oh, hurry. Make love to me. Oh, Snake, I want you.
Who's that?
You don't like girls?
It's not clear, however, whether Mantis is putting these words in Meryl's mouth or simply allowing her to say what was already on her mind. After Snake defeats Mantis, a member of his radio support team questions his motive in saving Meryl.
But why did you go so far out of your way to save her? For Campbell's sake, or maybe it's because you like her?
I don't want to see any woman die right in front of me.
Oh, really? Since when did anybody's death bother you so much?
And although the Colonel disregards this notion by saying Snake simply has a big heart, we as players do start to question how large of a role Meryl plays within that heart. Mantis lays on the floor, slowly dying, as he begins to talk to Snake. He says that his whole life he has been sickened by people's undying lust for sex and the need to spread one's seed. He claims that this is the source for war and conflict. After reading his mind, Mantis assumes Snake feels the same way, that the super soldier is devoid of such trivial emotions, though one gets the impression from Snake's saving of Meryl and the comments made after it that perhaps this isn't the case. In the final moments of Mantis's life, he tells Snake what he saw when reading Meryl's mind.
I saw you there. You have a large place in your heart.
A large place?
Yes, a large place. But I do not know if your futures lie together.
These lines can perhaps shed some light on the previous question of whether Meryl's sexual proposition of Snake under Mantis's control came from her own mind or not. Though for now, let's move on, as Snake seems to. He still has no time for such trivial emotions. And when Meryl asks if he ever liked anyone, we get a reminder of just how high Snake's emotional walls still are.
I've never been interested in anyone else's life.
So you are all alone, just like Mantis said.
Other people just complicate my life. I don't like to get involved.
You're a sad, lonely man.
Come on, let's go.
I don't want this video to be a play-by-play of the series' plot, but for now, let's move straight on to the next story beat. The fight with Sniper Wolf. No, not that Sniper Wolf. God, this video hasn't reached that far down into the depths of depravity. Yet. Sniper Wolf is MGS1's femme fatale antagonist. She is a graceful sharpshooter with a sultry Eastern European accent and flowing blonde hair. Before we even see Wolf, we are made to bear witness to her unforgiving cunningness, as she uses Meryl as bait to lure Snake out into the open.
Meryl, get down! Meryl!
Notice how Snake only shouts for Meryl to move when the crosshair is over her crotch. He only sees that she's in danger when her very womanhood is threatened. As Meryl lies bleeding out, Snake's emotional walls finally seem to crack a little. He becomes determined to save her and says that he doesn't need an excuse to, that he will save her for himself.
I'm gonna save Meryl no matter what it takes.
Okay. Thanks.
What's wrong, Naomi?
Nothing. I'm just surprised you're willing to sacrifice yourself. You got the genes of a soldier, not a savior.
You trying to say that I'm only interested in saving my own skin?
I wouldn't go that far, but
I don't know what the hell my genes look like, and I don't care. I operate on instinct.
like an animal?
I'm going to save Meryl. I don't need an excuse.
Okay.
And I'm not doing it for someone else either. I'm gonna save Meryl for myself. Colonel, don't worry.
This is the first time in the story that Snake takes an action or makes a decision that isn't ordered of him. His character arc is in full effect. Snake, unfortunately, fails at taking out Sniper Wolf and is captured by the enemy. But before he is taken away, Wolf marks him as prey. This marking isn't completely unemotional, however, as later we will find out that Wolf has a habit of falling in love with her prey before she kills them, and this marking is the sign of that love. Though, from where I sit, the emotion that Wolf calls love feels a little more like obsession. She does not know Snake or any of her previously loved prey, so the emotion she feels towards them cannot come from a place of love and knowing. Instead, Sniper Wolf obsesses and almost lusts over the idea of killing her target. If this were true love, the idea of murder would not even enter her mind, as I hope we'd all agree. This mislabeling of love contrasts the truer love that is slowly starting to build between Snake and Meryl, and helps our protagonist better understand these new feelings that are starting to creep into his previously cold and unemotional psyche. Sniper Wolf and her spotlight moments in the narrative give us a great opportunity to not only further explore the ever-shifting emotional connection between Snake and Meryl, but also allows us to focus on another of Metal Gear's iconic, sexually and emotionally stunted characters, Otacon.
What's with these guys? It's like one of my Japanese animes.
Snake meets the awkward scientist Hal Otacon Emmerich earlier in the story, but we do not start to get a real sense of who he is until Snake is captured, and the scientist attempts to help him escape. Up until this point in the story, Otacon could have only been described as a coward, even urinating himself in the face of danger. So Hal's sudden burst of courage, signalled to the player by his appearance on the other side of Snake's cell door, seems out of place at first, until he mentions Sniper Wolf. He explains to Snake that the sniper is treating him kindly. Snake brushes it off as Stockholm Syndrome, but Otacon continues.
I was taking care of the dogs here. After the terrorists took over, they were planning to shoot all the dogs. But Sniper Wolf stopped them. She even let me feed them when I asked. She likes dogs. She must be a good person.
That insistence that Wolf is a good person due to her care for dogs displays Otacon's naivete to the player, as they have seen that Sniper Wolf uses her femininity to trick and deceive the men in her way, much like other examples of the femme fatale character cliché. Otacon's feelings for Sniper Wolf, whether misguided or not, seem to give him the courage to risk his life and help Snake. Though this courage does not seem to save Snake completely, as Otacon is still too cowardly to help meaningfully. Later, once Snake has escaped and is continuing with his mission, he again bumps into Otacon. The scientist compares Snake to the hero of an action film, referring to his proficiency in completing his mission thus far. This clearly strikes a nerve with the soldier, who is still torturing himself over not being able to save Meryl.
In the movies, the hero always saves the girl.
You mean Meryl? Sorry. Forget I said anything. Snake, there's something I've really got to ask you. It's why I followed you up this far. Have you ever loved someone?
That's what you came to ask?
No, I mean, I was wondering if even soldiers fall in love.
What are you trying to say?
I want to ask you, do you think love can bloom Even on a battlefield?
Yeah, I do. I think at any time, any place, people can fall in love with each other. But if you love someone, you have to be able to protect them.
I think so too.
This now iconic exchange of dialogue clues us in to where our two male leads are at in their respective character arcs. Snake answers yes to the question of whether love can bloom on a battlefield, an answer the more cynical and emotionally closed off version of the character from the start of the adventure would have never given. It is clear just how big of an impact Merrill and his failure to save her has had on Snake as a character. He is slowly starting to realise that his emotional wall may have only ever been there to protect himself from the deepest sort of pain. This well-worn trope of a character arc works for Snake in the first MGS title simply due to the fact that the rest of the game's characters and elements are steeped in similar cliché, and the narrative revels in sending up these genre archetypes. Speaking of, Otacon from Snake and the player's perspective has seemingly fallen deeper into Sniper Wolf's trap, with his insinuation of having fallen in love with her. The juxtaposition of these two men and their polar opposite feelings of love, with Snake reluctant and Otacon over-infused, subtly suggests that, despite their differences, these men will end up hurting themselves and others around them with these two extremes of love. Eventually, Snake is reunited not with his love, but with Otacon's, as the soldier once again faces off against the sniper. This time, however, Snake and the player manage to get the best of her. As will become series tradition, as Sniper Wolf lies bleeding out, she tells the player and the protagonist of her backstory.
I was born on a battlefield, raised on a battlefield. Gunfire, sirens, and screams. They were my lullabies. Hunted like dogs, day after day, driven from our ragged shelters. That was my life. Each morning I'd wake up and find a few more of my family or friends dead beside me. I'd stare at the morning sun and pray to make it through the day. The governments of the world turned a blind eye to our misery. But then, he appeared. My hero. Saladin. He took me away from all that.
Saladin? You mean Big Boss?
I became a sniper. Hidden, watching everything through a rifle's scope. Now I could see war, not from inside, but from the outside, as an observer. I watched the brutality, the stupidity of mankind through the scope of my rifle.
When first encountering this scene whilst replaying the game for this video, I was struck with how Sniper Wolf and her backstory are almost a direct opposite of Merrill and hers. While Sniper Wolf was forced to deal with violence, death, and the ugly truth of war her whole life, eventually leading her to becoming the cold and calculated killer we see, Merrill revealed to Snake at their first encounter that she grew up idolizing the protagonist and other perceived heroes of war, buying into romantic pro-military propaganda, never understanding the grim reality behind it. This stark contrast of romanticized female characters further deepens the aforementioned juxtaposition between Snake and Otacon's separate romantic feelings. This speech also serves to humanize Wolf and allow the player and protagonist to see even a little bit of what Otacon clearly sees in her. By the time Sniper Wolf is almost dead, it seems her and Snake have come to some sort of mutual human understanding. Wolf can identify with the soldier's desire to save the woman he is slowly falling in love with, and Snake can more than relate to the sniper's traumatic childhood and motives in becoming a soldier. So, as Wolf begins to fade, she calls Snake a hero. And for the first time in our story, our protagonist does not verbally object to the labelling, signifying that Snake is slowly beginning to see himself in a more romantic light, and has finally found a reason, beyond orders, to fight. He is ready to save Meryl, but before he can, Otacon comes rushing onto the scene.
I loved you.
What is it?
My gun. Give it to me. She's part of me. Everyone's here now. Oh, okay, hero. Set me free.
Goodbye. Snake, you said that love could bloom on the battlefield. But I couldn't save her.
Otacon's sadness is more than understandable in this moment. Despite only just meeting Sniper Wolf and under such intense circumstances, he truly seemed to love her, though his display of the belief that he could save the sniper further shows the character's naivete in love and war. I do believe, however, that Otacon is hardened by this moment. The hurt seems to have changed the way he thinks and speaks, a fact that becomes even more fascinating when again juxtaposed with Snake. As Otacon loses his innocence and begins to question himself, Snake gains hope and strengthens his resolve. Let us now skip forward to the game's climax and ending, in which our protagonist, Solid Snake, fights his literal brother, Liquid Snake, the leader of the terrorists, with literal fists on top of a literal nuclear weapon, all in the name of his new literal love, Meryl. After seemingly defeating Liquid, Solid runs to check up on a hog-tied Meryl. With Snake finally in Meryl's arms, she explains that she endured torture and worse to finally see him again. The love she had for him is what kept her going. The two can seemingly finally be open with each other after going through such trauma. But as they are about to seal the deal with a kiss, Snake's codec rings.
That's my codec.
It's Otacon, who tells Snake that he has created a route for his and Meryl's escape from the base, though he will have to stay behind. Snake pleads with him to try and escape too, but Hal realizes not all of them can survive. And now with everything he's been through, with his love lost, he has the courage to nominate himself as sacrifice. Otacon has come a long way since the cowardly actions of his and Snake's first interactions. And if you ask me, that character development can be put down to his feelings for Sniper Wolf and the emotional path they led him down.
Snake, I'm a complete person now. I've found a reason to live.
Good. Don't die on me.
Same to you. Take care of Meryl, okay?
I will.
Okay, I gotta go. I promise I'll do something about your escape route.
Thanks.
Thanks? Well, that sounds nice.
I believe in you.
Thanks, Snake.
Snake and Meryl begin their escape, but are hounded by soldiers, and eventually Liquid catches up to them. With the blonder brother on their tail, the couple manage to just make it out of the base and into the sunlight, when an explosion flips their vehicle and the two are left pinned underneath. Suddenly, Liquid appears and it seems hope is lost. With a gun to their heads, he prepares to pull the trigger. And then... Liquid succumbs to the Foxdie virus that both him and his brother are injected with. Our protagonist must be happy to see his enemy downed, though he must understand that this may just be a vision of his future. And with that, the mission is complete. Now, every Metal Gear Solid game ends with a rather on-the-nose monologue, and the first in the series was delivered by Meryl. She speaks of once believing that life was unchangeable, defined by genetic code. Though the events that just took place and her new belief in herself and Snake has changed that. She encourages Snake, and by extension the player, to choose life, and says that she will too.
Genes exist to pass down our hopes and dreams for the future through our children. Living is a link to the future. That's how all life works. Loving each other, teaching each other. That's how we can change the world. I finally realized it. The true meaning of life. Thank you, Snake.
With these few lines, we see just how far Snake and Meryl have come as characters. The fact that Meryl is attributing such hopeful thoughts to Snake shows just how different these characters are from the naive and cynical caricatures introduced at the beginning of the game. The love that blossomed on the battlefield between these two soldiers broke the years of conditioning that training and propaganda had them trapped in, and let them see that there's more to life than just fighting.
Until today, I've lived only for myself. Survival has been the only thing I cared about in my life.
That's not just you. That's how everyone is.
I only felt truly alive when I was staring death in the face. I don't know. Maybe it's written into my genes.
What about now? What do your genes say about your future now?
Maybe it's time I live for someone else.
Someone else?
Yeah. Someone like you. Maybe that's the real way to live.
Although the message of living for someone else might be slightly corny or ham-fisted, I believe this is the point. As I have previously stated, this first Metal Gear Solid game is an exercise in trope and archetype. So this simple character arc, from hardened and cold soldier to wise and loving man, feels like a sincere yet knowing evocation of classic love and war narratives. And it steeps the narrative in a wider cultural canon, allowing its individual elements to come together into a well-worn yet iconic parable. With everything we've discussed, it's no wonder why Metal Gear Solid was such a hit upon release and for decades afterwards. Kojima's almost fan-fiction-esque employment of character archetypes and cliches lets this low-poly Japanese video game feel like a high-budget Hollywood action movie. Though, like the 80s flicks that inspired it, it holds subtle yet meaningful commentary about the romanticization of war and the dehumanization of the people forced to fight within it. Oh, and that's Metal Gear Solid 1 done!
Big Button 2 start. He's coming for all the video essayists. All of them out there. Super Eye Patch Wolf, Jacob Geller, Tim Rogers. None of them are safe when Big Button 2 starts around.
Okay, let's take a quick breather, because the game we're about to get into is, well, dense, to to say the least. When it comes to Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, it's hard to know where to start, and even harder to know what parts of the game are relevant to today's discussion. I'm not gonna lie to you. I've written and rewritten this part of the script more than a few times at this point, and have only just come to the realization that I'm gonna have to change up the way in which we cover these games for this one in particular. MGS2 is just too big to go through point by point like we did with the first game. Given just how thematically and narratively packed the second Metal Gear Solid game is, it's preferable for me as a presenter and writer to only focus in on the moments and ideas within the game relevant to the themes of love, sex, and romance. So, let's jump right into it. The first thing one must understand about Metal Gear Solid 2 is that it doesn't give a fuck about your feelings. The game was conceived, designed, and sold to toy with the minds of its players. And nothing proves that more than its new protagonist, Jack, or Raiden. I wonder how the higher-ups at Konami responded when Hideo Kojima first told them that he planned to kill off his iconic main character, Solid Snake. They must have had a lot of faith in the director, because his replacement for the grizzled super soldier was, well, a less grizzled super soldier. Raiden is not Snake. While Snake is calm and collected, always focused on the mission and emotionally unavailable, Raiden is his diametric reflection. He is shrill and meek, always complaining, and he wears his heart on his sleeve to a fault. This character, who couldn't be further from the protagonist of the first game, is injected into a situation that actually couldn't be closer to the events of that first game. Raiden is sent to a secretive base being held hostage by a group of terrorists with ties to Big Boss. He slowly makes his way round the facility, taking out the terrorists, and eventually will uncover a conspiracy larger than himself. These parallels to the first game are almost immediately noticeable to anyone familiar with what took place at Shadow Moses, and the strange hints the characters drop towards their understanding of these similarities creates an extremely uncanny atmosphere from the very start. Also, like Snake in the first game, Raiden is not alone in his mission, and is accompanied via codec by Colonel Campbell, the very same, and the new protagonist's girlfriend, Rose. Snake too had a romantic companion with him on his mission, though the difference with Raiden and Rose is that they have a history before the game. History the player is not privy to, and that will be used against the player when trying to pass the wider thematic narrative. Initially, it's hard to understand where Rose and Raiden stand with each other. The way they communicate implies that they are far past the honeymoon period that we saw Snake and Meryl in at the end of the first game. And their strange, near passive-aggressive conversations hints that there are many things the two aren't telling each other. Rose asks, and will continue to ask Raiden if he remembers what day tomorrow is. Raiden doesn't, though from Rose's tone we can gather that, in her eyes at least, he definitely should. The player, of course, also doesn't know what Rose is getting at, though can tell that this is important to her. This realization, along with the lack of answers to Rose's questions, puts the player in an awkward position, and in the same place as Raiden, not knowing something that it seems we should. So, if the change in protagonist wasn't a big enough clue, the framing of Raiden and Rose's relationship should be the definitive warning sign that Metal Gear Solid 2 is not satisfied in simply continuing the story of the first game, and instead it wants to reckon with the thematic implications and contradictions conjured up by Snake's time at Shadow Moses. When Raiden learns of Rose's involvement with the mission, he vehemently objects to it. Raiden, through his extensive VR training, has taught himself to close off his emotions on the battlefield, something that Snake could do naturally, and he believes that Rose's presence will make this impossible. The Colonel rebuts with,
"We've learned that it doesn't work that way, and on the field, you need all the help you can get."
As players of the first game, we can see where the Colonel is coming from here. Though, on the same hand, we should understand the fatal mistake the Colonel is making with this statement. That, during the first game, Snake and Meryl's romance blossomed naturally through the concrete cracks of Shadow Moses. And, perhaps, the Colonel is underestimating the importance of that organic blossoming by imposing Rose's presence on the mission. This is the first time, though certainly not the last, that the player will be made aware of the manufactured nature of Raiden's mission, the game's plot, and the character's emotional connections. As we carry on through the story, the contrived nature of its events will only become more unignorable. The initial odd taste left in the players' mouths by Raiden and Rose's interactions will only become odder and more sour as the plot progresses. It's almost impossible to predict how the two will talk to each other when Rose calls. Most of the time, they talk with a strange and awkward detachment, though occasionally they will indulge in romantic conversations or seemingly be furious at each other. Pressing select to pick up one of Rose's calls is basically emotional Russian roulette.
Jack, do you remember the day we met?
I'm kind of busy right now, Rose.
The tonal and emotional inconsistency of Raiden and Rose's interactions is a large contributor to the game's overall uncanny tone. That uncanny tone seems to permeate every aspect of MGS2, and as Raiden gets deeper into his mission, that tone is only ever amplified. Whether it's fighting a terrorist vampire, bumping into the supposedly dead protagonist of the first game under a different name, or being sexually assaulted by the President of the United States, MGS2 steadily piles odd moments on top of each other, all in an attempt to make the player question their surroundings. And I think one of the most successful mindfucks MGS2 pulls off in its first half is the emasculation of its main character. As overly explained in my section on the first Metal Gear Solid game, its protagonist, Solid Snake, is an amalgamation of various action movie cliches and tropes, as to allow the player the ultimate power fantasy, and a protagonist they can idolize. MGS2 does the opposite with Raiden. From his strange and detached relationship with his love interest to the mocking and violation he is made to endure by the majority of the people he meets during his mission, almost all of Raiden's characterization seems to invite the player to dislike him, or at least question his suitability as a main character. This lack of cohesion between player and protagonist is, to begin with, Metal Gear Solid 2's largest contribution to its own uncanny atmosphere and tone. Okay, now that we have sufficiently covered our main character in the first half of our story, let us now shift our focus to a couple of supporting characters, and perhaps the strangest story thread in this already bizarre game. So, I don't have to go back over who Otacon is. By this point, we are more than aware of him and his role within the narrative of the first game. Otacon shows up in MGS2, and is his usual whining, emotionally complicated self. For most of the game, Raiden is not interacting directly with the scientist, but instead with his estranged sister, Emmerich, or EE, who is also a scientist, though considerably younger than her sibling. She has been stationed to work on the secret Metal Gear project housed at the Big Shell base Raiden's mission takes place on. Raiden is tasked with retrieving Emma from a flooded area of the base and returning her to her brother to aid in stopping the launch of Metal Gear. During their journey to her brother, Emma tells Raiden of her childhood and family dynamic.
I remember my brother giving me a piggyback ride. I was sleeping with my ear against his back. I could hear his heartbeat.
Sounds like you were close.
We were, back then. We were stepchildren in our parents' second marriages. Wherever my brother went, I used to tag along. My brother didn't have any close friends, so he used to take care of me. We both wanted to be loved so much. So much that we used to pretend.
Pretend?
Yeah, we used to play house. My brother was the husband and I was the wife. But it was always just make-believe. We were only kids. You know what I mean.
I never had a family, but I think I know what you mean.
When first shown this scene, I took note of Emma's strange interjection that her and her brother's playing of house when they were children was only pretend. I felt that that was an odd interjection and only hinted at the fact that maybe, as a statement, it's not exactly true. Once Emma finally arrives back with her brother, having been severely injured on the way, this suspicion of mine was confirmed. As Emma bleeds out in Otacon's arms, she expresses how badly she wanted to see her brother again after his father died in an accident and he abandoned the family. She tells him that she only ever got involved with Metal Gear to become closer to him, so that he would look at her. Look at her as a woman. When Otacon replies that he could never do that, she shuns him for being too honest. It pains her to hear the truth that they, as siblings, could never be together. As she begins to take her final breaths, she asks her brother, Otacon, Hal, to call her Emma, instead of the EE abbreviation he religiously sticks to when referring to her.
Can I ask you one last favor?
Sure.
Call me Emma.
What?
Please call me Emma.
What's wrong with EE? Emma? 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 Answer me!
Only after EE is gone does Otacon finally call her Emma, like a half-hearted attempt to bring her back. Of course, it doesn't work. As soon as she can no longer hear him, he admits.
I didn't leave you. Because of the accident, I had a relationship with your mother. She seduced me. And it went on. My father's death was no accident. He took his own life. It was my fault, all my fault. Forgive me, Emma.
After he finally got that crushing weight off of his chest, he closes Emma's eyes. She's dead. As Hal begins to pick himself up, however, Emma's parrot that has watched all this play out speaks Otacon's name.
Hal?
He walks over to the cage, opens it, and tearfully embraces the bird as it speaks in Emma's voice.
Hal?
Emma's gone and she'll never know the awful truth. Once Emma's dead, Otacon tries hard to listen to Snake's orders to evacuate the hostages and For a brief moment, it seems like he has it all together, until the parrot speaks again.
Hal, I miss you. Hal, I miss you. I miss you. I miss you.
Otacon breaks down and, in monologue, he tells Emma what he couldn't while she was alive.
You and me, we're the same. Both you and I, we were always alone. Always. We only wanted to be loved. We were always waiting for somebody. Somebody who would love us, but we were wrong. You can't wait to be loved. You have to go out and find it. 4 years ago, I realized that you can't just wish for a happy family. You have to make it happen. I only wish I knew that sooner. I learned that I could love, as you probably did, Emma.
Otacon's assertion that someone can't wait to be loved and his instruction to go out and make a happy family seems to stand in stark contrast to the rest of the game's damning depiction of forced or manufactured love. Thematically, I'm not quite sure where this monologue fits in with the rest of the game's overt messaging. That said, its emotional honesty and directness definitely fits with the tonal shift that the narrative takes towards sincerity at this point. Wow. That took a turn. This aspect of MGS2's plot is certainly an outlier, due to its sudden tonal shift into complex family drama, but most importantly, due to its overwhelming sincerity. Whilst the rest of the game feels entirely detached and intentionally cold in its presentation, this scene dives headfirst into uncharted thematic territory, both for this sequel and the original game. At no point thus far in the wider Metal Gear Solid narrative have we as an audience had to deal with such complex and sticky topics as attraction between siblings, attraction between mother and child, and, worst of all, suicide. The weight of these themes is compounded by their sudden introduction and erasure from the story, creating an incredibly striking plotline. Apart from character development for Otacon in the later games, these plot points don't ever really come up again within this second entry, and certainly don't affect Raiden's character arc or the wider narrative at all. So, why is this story thread in Sons of Liberty? I believe it all has to do with the game's wider theme of manufactured love. As players, we are led to believe that the love and attraction that Emma felt for Hal was constructed and entirely fabricated through them playing house as children. The love Hal felt for his stepmother, which would lead him to abandoning Emma out of guilt, was manufactured through the power dynamic Hal and Emma's mother were engaged in, and the exploitation of that dynamic by her through seduction. Both of these manufactured loves only ever led to pain and isolation for Emma and Hal. And the game is blatant with that fact when it juxtaposes the two secret, opposing attractions the pair harboured. The sudden sincerity the game displays is harder to explain, though I believe it has something to do with the game's intentional disorientation of its players. As we have already discussed, MGS2 goes to great lengths to toy with its players' emotions and expectations, all in an attempt to create a bizarre and uncanny postmodern atmosphere. My belief is that this tonal shift is in service of that atmosphere, and the fact that the game almost immediately jumps back to its detached baseline after this scene only strengthens that belief.
Indeed, there is a return to MGS2's cold tonal standard after this moment, though that normalcy will not last for long.
A ninja? What the?
As we begin to talk about MGS2's final act, and its full dive into existential postmodernism and meta self-reference. Throughout MGS2's runtime, the series creator and the game's director, Hideo Kojima, is toying with his audience. We explored this before with the introduction of Raiden. However, as the game begins its ending and its descent into madness, this feeling becomes a tightly held belief to anyone who's paying attention.
In the time between the first and second installment, it seems as though Kojima perceived a gap between the wants and expectations of his fans and the direction in which he wanted to take the series in the upcoming sequel. Instead of bowing to those fans and most likely the demands of his publisher Konami, Kojima decided to make his sequel about this difference in opinion, creating a rift that would only deepen on the game's release.
Metal Gear Solid 2 stands as a prophecy of its own divisiveness, as it wheels out overbearingly unsubtle commentary about rekindling old loves and cruelly dangles the exaggeratedly cool protagonist of the first game in front of the player's face.
It's in the final act of MGS2 that Kojima tips his hat towards self-awareness and lays out his frustrations with having to rekindle a dead love.
After the Emma fiasco, Raiden is captured and awakens strapped up and ready to be interrogated, almost exactly like Snake in the first game. The only difference this time is that Ocelot is accompanied by Solidus Snake, the leader of the terrorists, the big bad of the game, and the third clone of Big Boss, making him brothers with Solid and Liquid. Ocelot tells Solidus that they ran a background check on Raiden and nothing came up. He's a ghost. But Solidus says that he knows Raiden.
This is my son. I taught him everything. Jack, I never thought I'd see you again.
You know me?
You don't remember. Your name, your skills. Everything you know, you learned from me. The 80s. A civil war. You were one of the best among the child soldiers that fought in that conflict. When you were barely 10 years old, you became the platoon leader of the small boy unit. At the time, your outstanding kill record earned you several nicknames, including White Devil and Jack the Ripper. Jack, I was your godfather. I named you.
This is where we finally get to know a little bit about Raiden's backstory. Up until this point, and I think very intentionally, info on Raiden before we first see him is kept sparse. I mean, just look at my prior confusion at the state of his and Rose's relationship. With this bombshell of information, our perception of Raiden begins to fundamentally change. We find out that, in fact, this character, who most will have assumed to be a coward and a weakling compared to Solid Snake, is actually, spiritually, part of the same lineage. What does this mean for our disdain of him? Do we now sympathise with him due to his past as a child soldier and his proximity to a character we love? And what does this mean for our understanding of Rose and the relationship that they share?
Well, those are all good questions,
though I can only answer the last one right away, as when Raiden is suddenly broken out of his restraints and goes to save his mission data with Rose, she confronts him about what just happened.
Yeah.
Jack, is it true? What Solidus said?
Yes.
It's unbelievable. Drafting small children, sending them to war? It's not allowed under international conventions.
This is clearly the first time Rose has heard anything about this. Raiden was not only a closed book to us, the players controlling him, but also to the person he shares his life with. He clearly holds some trauma.
Why didn't you tell me?
You couldn't begin to understand.
You wouldn't know that until you try me.
I didn't want you to get hurt. There was never a real reason for me to fight, except that someone put a gun in my hand. And that someone was him.
It wasn't your fault.
If I survived the day's fight, I was praised, fed, and had a bed to sleep in. I think I was only 6 when I held my first AK. But I'm not even sure of that.
Jack.
I'm not like Snake. I never questioned why we fought. There was no purpose, no way out. They give you a gun, you ask how many to kill. If you didn't, you were the one they shot instead.
It's okay. No one is blaming you.
We were shown Hollywood action films every day. The kind with macho guys and big guns. They call it image training. They built us from the ground up into killing machines.
As players, this minute or so of dialogue is the most transparent view of Raiden's true nature that we get in the whole game. Raiden holds all the weight of his childhood trauma on his shoulders alone. Despite Rose's openness to him, he refuses to let her in. He says it's to protect her, though it's pretty obvious it's only to protect himself. And when he starts comparing himself to Snake, it becomes crystal clear what the game is trying to say to its players with all of this trauma dumping.
Raiden differentiates himself from the protagonist of the first game by claiming that he only ever followed orders. Something we as players are already fully aware of, as Raiden is being told what to do throughout the entire game. Raiden sees Snake as the emotional fighter, someone led by passion and humanity, someone who is able to make decisions on their own and manifest their own destiny. Raiden believes he was only ever bred to be a killing machine, brought up to exclusively follow orders. Raiden then mentions that as a child soldier, he was shown Hollywood action movies, probably not unlike the ones that originally inspired Metal Gear Solid, as a form of image training.
I believe this, and the depiction of Snake as the ultimate hero through Raiden's comparison, is a commentary on the reception and the artistic role of the first game in the series.
Metal Gear Solid 1, as mentioned many times, is an homage to the tropes and cliches of Hollywood action movies, and Snake is meant to embody the role of the power fantasy, self-insert badass. Through this depiction, war and conflict almost takes a glorified and romanticized image in the series' first outing, and I think that Kojima was fully aware of that going into the second game. Raiden's role was always to juxtapose Snake in MGS1, but with the reveal of the new character's dark and wholly unglamorous background of conflict and coercion, this contrast is made devastatingly clear.
I get the feeling Kojima was trying to dispel the slight air of propagandism the first game held, and shake off any romantic depictions of war left over. Raiden is no hero or brave outlier. He's basically one of the grunts you face in the first game, though his lack of heroism or protagonistic qualities does not make him a monster, someone to be feared. Instead, his tragic backstory opens up sympathy within the player for not only Raiden, but for many of the characters within the series who have had to deal with the real, human side effects of war. This moment is basically Kojima's ultimate self-reflection on the collage of influences he strung together to make Metal Gear Solid 1. He removes the ideas from their romantic Hollywood aesthetics and examines what war really means for the people affected by it. Kojima will even use this uncanny love story that he has been weaving throughout the game to drive home Raiden's pain for the player. When Raiden says,
"I'm afraid of the night. That's why I don't sleep next to you."
We start to fully grasp not only the dark and tortured nature of Raiden's characterization, but also why his relationship with Rose has felt so strained and off the entire game. There is a fundamental lack of communication. Raiden doesn't want to talk about the bad things that he did. and what it might mean for his place in the world.
Suddenly, Raiden goes from an annoyance to a truly tragic figure. A character whose very existence as a convoluted piece of meta-theming parallels their fictional exploitation by the story's main villain and the government he fights for. Raiden is a tool used by both the characters and the creators to enact a rekindling of a romanticized past.
Raiden's useful idiot persona is only heightened as the game draws to its explosive conclusion. After Raiden is free from interrogation, he is forced to sneak around the base completely naked, cupping his crown jewels within clasped hands. Initially, when I saw the game reveal Raiden in his birthday suit, I thought it was yet another example of the creators trolling the character, and by extension the player. Though, now that I think about it with the context of the bombshell that just dropped about Raiden's past, and my knowledge of what's to come, I've begun to see this moment as more serious in its intentions.
I believe that Raiden's nudity is meant to represent the fact that he is no longer a mystery to us. We as players, and the wider cast of supporting characters, are starting to understand the protagonist far more, removing his sole defense mechanism of mystery. Raiden is now a tragic open book, naked for us to see. And so, the game now shifts its focus past the fourth wall and starts to undress its own facade, and the player's involvement within it. So, Metal Gear Solid 2 sort of breaks after this point.
Almost immediately after Raiden exits the interrogation room, he begins to get codec calls from the Colonel. Strange codec calls. The Colonel's voice keeps breaking up. He's not making any sense, and when he starts to mention simulations, the astute player should start to piece together what is happening. Raiden asks the Colonel if he's working for the Patriots, the shadowy organisation that are slowly revealing themselves to be behind much of the game's conspiracy and overall strangeness. The Colonel ignores the question, and then...
Your role, that is, mission, is to infiltrate the structure and disarm the terrorists.
My role? Why do you keep saying that?
Why not? This is a type of role-playing game. The point is that you play out your part, and I expect you to turn in a perfect performance.
Colonel, I just remembered something.
What?
That I've never met you in person. Not once.
Complete your mission, according to the simulation.
Colonel, who are you?
No more questions. We have Rosemary.
What do you mean by that?
Over and out.
This is the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 2's big reveal. That in fact Raiden, and hence the player, have been acting out a simulated mission this whole time. It becomes apparent that a healthy portion of what you and Raiden have experienced has been fake, or even manufactured. All of the similarities to the first game may start to make sense in the player's mind, though everything else is still completely up in the air. This moment is truly one of the most fascinating and expertly executed pieces of writing in the entire MGS franchise, so let's discuss it. The Colonel's words seem to be chosen so precisely as to lead the player to realizing what is happening before the climactic fourth wall break. The Colonel, up until this point in the second game, has basically been a blank slate, only there to throw exposition at Raiden and tell the player their next objective. This utilitarian nature of his characterization almost leads him to feeling like part of the game's mechanics rather than a character, as many similarly bossy game characters do. No, I won't be talking about BioShock. So when the Colonel explicitly references the fact that he and Raiden are in a game, it feels as though he is directly talking to the player and acknowledging their role in proceedings. The Colonel says that the point of this game is to play your part, and I expect you to turn in a perfect performance. Which is a metaphor with so many potential meanings that I don't have time to go through them traditionally, so here's a list. It's a comment on the linear nature of the stories told in MGS and many other action video games.
Go away, Bioshock! It's a comment on gender roles in regards to Raiden's femininity and his strained relationship with Rose. It's also a comment on a soldier's lack of autonomy. And it could even be a hint to the way Kojima felt having to revisit a franchise he was happy to leave behind. Moving on. Raiden remembers that he has never actually met the Colonel in person before, adding to the army man's eerie and mysterious character turn. Though, to me, the more interesting implications of this line actually lie in Raiden and Rose's relationship. If you remember, at the beginning of the game it was stated that Rose was the only person on the mission that Raiden knew previously. Though, with the reveal of the simulation and the possibility that the Colonel and Rose could be part of it too, the strange fog surrounding their relationship only thickens. And then, when the Colonel ends the call with, "We have Rosemary," the layers of intrigue only deepen because, does that mean that Rose isn't part of the simulation? Is the Colonel just bluffing? How much does Rose know? How much is there to know? After this, the strangeness continues. The Colonel does keep calling and has some of the most haunting lines of dialogue in the history of gaming, though I'm not going to break down each call like I did for the previous one. What I do want to mention though, is that during these calls, Rose seems to join in on the mindfuckery, seemingly hinting that she is part of the simulation, meaning that Raiden's one connection to the outside world is gone. This realization is the moment in which this barrage of fourth wall breaks goes from bewildering and almost sort of cool to oppressively isolating and lonely. At the start of the game, the Metal Gear fan turned their nose up at this new character. They yearned for the coolness, the camaraderie, and the proficiency of Big Daddy Snake, but were left with just another guy who idolized him. Though, after 10 hours of slowly and painfully peeling back the paint of Raiden's character and witnessing him lose everything, that fan, that player, is left alone. Just the TV, the console, and Raiden. All they've got is each other. Damn you, Kojima. Damn you, Kojima. Damn you, Kojima! Wait, actually, we're not alone. Who's that lady in the corner of the screen? The Colonel continues his calls, just repeating mission briefs from the previous games in the series as if this has all happened before. And then, the crux of my argument.
Jack, it's me.
Hi, Rose.
Jack, I owe you an apology.
If it's about that conversation just now, I'm the one who's sorry.
No, it's something else.
What is it?
That day at Federal Hall 2 years ago, it wasn't a coincidence. I was ordered to keep an eye on you.
Keep an eye on me?
Yes, by the Patriots.
You're a spy?
I suppose. Yes. It's an ugly word. Are you still there?
Was sleeping with me a part of the job?
I fell in love with you.
How could anyone?
I can't excuse what I did. I've reported every detail of your personal life to them these 2 years. What you did, said, everything.
Must have been fun.
But some things I didn't tell anyone. Like what I felt for you.
So that's why you were involved in this mission. I should have known. Why else would they toss an analyst into the mix at the last minute?
I'm sorry. I know what I did was wrong.
No matter where I go, I get used.
I reinvented myself to suit your tastes. Hairstyle, clothes, the way I moved, things I talked about. You say you love the color of my hair, my eyes. They're not even real.
You must have gone over my psych profile with a fine-tooth comb.
It was my job.
Great performance. Had me completely fooled.
What I really wanted was for you to see the real me. It hurt to play out this artificial romance. It was worse to lie to myself than to you. The more love you gave me,
the more it hurt. Because I knew the person you loved was just a character.
So it was artificial on my end too. It was just a game, not the real thing.
Oh, Jack.
I feel better knowing that.
What?
I was in love, or thought I was, with someone who didn't exist. I was trying to be someone I wasn't by loving what wasn't real. I don't know who you really are. The person I knew isn't real. She's not the woman I'm talking to right now. In a sense, the deception was my own, not theirs.
Jack, I thought I was acting because that was my job. But I did fall in love with you. That wasn't an act.
You expect me to believe that? It's okay. You had your reasons, right? Hey, I understand, but I have nothing left to...
Jack!
What?
I'm carrying... I'm pregnant, Jack.
Rose! What's going on?
This is the most significant moment us players get to see between Jack and Rose. Rose admits that she did not meet Raiden through coincidence, but instead was ordered to spy on him by the Illuminati-esque organization, the Patriots. If Raiden didn't feel alone before, I'm sure he does now. When Raiden asks if sleeping with him was part of the job, we get a rare, truly open look at his emotional state. He feels betrayed, as I think most would, though for Raiden, this betrayal stings deeper, due to his past as an abandoned child taken in by a militia. Raiden has expressed previously how intimacy is hard for him due to his childhood, and this question shows just how much that intimacy he shared with Rose actually means to him. It's no wonder he feels used. Rose explains that whilst on the job, she started to fall in love with Raiden, a fact that she kept from her superiors. She was manufacturing the situation to make Raiden fall in love with her. One could even say she made her own little simulation. When Rose tries to explain her obsessive knowledge of Raiden, she simply hides behind her job, but then says how much this artificial romance was hurting her and how much she wanted Raiden to see the real her. Rose expresses all this guilt for her manipulation of Raiden, though it all falls flat. I mean, she was actively participating in the manipulation of the main character and their wider situation. She herself created this manufactured love that she claims to hate so much. She was the one who built the foundation of their relationship on lies, and somehow is now shocked that it's crumbling. Throughout this whole conversation, it's still not clear if this Rose is the real Rose or just part of the simulation. And those lines are blurred even further at the end of the call. When Rose's voice distorts and tells Raiden that she's pregnant, I read that as the simulation, whatever it is, taking back control for a second and trying to lure Raiden back under its spell by dangling such an emotional event above his head. This moment genuinely gives me goosebumps every time I see it. There was just one other point I wanted to touch on during this codec call. When Rose says, "I knew the person you loved was just a character," and right after Raiden says it was just a game, I started to think about what this line could mean in the context of the wider meta-narrative spun through the replacement of Snake as protagonist. I feel as though the line about loving a character is a direct call-out of the Metal Gear fanbase who so vehemently wanted to play as Solid Snake. Almost as if Kojima is saying that fans love the idea of Snake and not the character himself. If you see Raiden as a stand-in for the player, as I do, the line, "I was trying to be someone I wasn't by loving what wasn't real," should also stick out to you. As Raiden, of course, is not Snake, though by taking his codename at the beginning of the game, and basically running through his greatest hits tour throughout the plot, he is adding to the idealization of, the myth of Solid Snake, and hence loving what isn't real. The Snake you love never existed. So be free. Funnily enough, just as Raiden ends his call with Rose, guess who shows up? Solid Snake.
Hell yeah! Of course, Snake is still presented far cooler than Raiden, with the first game's protagonist presented triumphantly in slow motion, as the second's stands naked, sneezing. Though, when Raiden puts his gear back on, something special happens. The two finally work together.
This might not sound like much, but this is the peak of Raiden's character arc within this game. In his previous codec call with Rose, he came to the realization that his indulgence in artificial romance, and hence his idealization of Snake, only spawned from a feeling of inadequacy. And with that revelation, he can begin to accept himself and become his own man. You see, he doesn't need to be Snake, because he's Raiden.
The rest of the game sees Raiden and Snake on equal footing, breaking out of the simulation and trying to thwart the Patriots' plans. Raiden fights with a katana and is presented in such a way to be empowering and badass, though in a completely separate way from Snake. He has truly come into his own as a character, and for the game's climax, Raiden will fight his child soldier general / father figure on top of the building where him and his girlfriend met. And on top of all that, we finally find out what day today is. The tomorrow Rose kept going on about in the beginning. It's the anniversary of the couple's meeting. This game isn't exactly subtle.
Of course, if the player is proficient enough, Raiden will beat Solidus and the game will start to draw to a close. But let me just warn you now, don't expect to have most of your questions answered by this ending.
The fight is over, and Raiden stands in the middle of the street. No one even stops to look at him. He asks, "Who am I really?" And then Snake shows up to answer that question.
No one quite knows who or what they are. The memories you have and the role you were assigned are burdens you had to carry. It doesn't matter if they were real or not. That's never the point.
Snake uses this moment to explain to Raiden and the player the themes at work throughout the narrative, as Meryl did in the first game. The roles and archetypes we have been assigned are nonsense. To live a truly fulfilling life, to truly love, we must take life as it comes and become the masters of our own destinies. We mustn't get bogged down in romanticized myths or fantasies of forced love. We must go out and live and find our own role.
After Snake's speech, Raiden finally seems to get the message and claims that from today, he will find his own name and he will find something worth passing on. A reference to Metal Gear's themes of cursed lineages. With that one line about choosing what to pass on, it really feels as though this moment is supposed to end the series as a whole. The conceit of the first and second game's bloodline and legacy-based narratives is put to rest.
This is a genuinely happy ending, a self-affirming one, a story that has said its piece.
As Raiden leaves the scene, ready to walk into the sunset, he finds Rose, stood there, for the first time in person. They share a stare until Raiden suddenly turns to see if Snake, his mentor, is still behind him. But alas, he's nowhere to be seen. Long gone. Snake's job is done. He has taught Raiden and the player to trust in themselves. They no longer need a legend to look up to. Rose asks,
"What's wrong?"
Nothing. Can I ask you something? Who am I, really?
I wouldn't know. But we're going to find out together, aren't we?
Oh. Yeah.
See me for what I am, okay?
I know.
Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty is the ultimate sophomore album. It's a piece solely focused on soul-searching. With the first game, Kojima created the ultimate power fantasy in Snake, and with that had to curse his lineage to balance him out. With this second game, Kojima examines what it even means to have a cursed lineage, and how the stories we tell about ourselves and others changes the way in which we interact with the world. At the beginning of the game, Raiden, and hence the player, can only view his character in the shadow of Snake. But throughout the narrative, Raiden comes into his own, and the player warms up to him at the same time. Not despite his differences to Snake, but because of them. When it comes to Raiden's relationship with Rose, it's clear to see that at the start of the game, the two lovers were hiding their true selves in an attempt to protect their own egos. It's only when the two talk about their pain and start to accept each other for their differences that they can begin to build a true, complicated, natural love. Basically, with MGS2, Kojima was trying to tell us, just don't force it. Unfortunately, however, it seems Konami didn't listen. And we're done. That's it. Wow, that was long. Okay, I'm gonna pack up and grab everything, and I'll just meet you inside. Yeah, you can go in.
Cool. I'll see you inside.
Sweet. Wow, what a long video, man. What a thrill. With darkness and silence through the night. What a thrill. I'm searching and I'll melt into you. What a fear in my heart. But you're so supreme. I give my life. Not for honor, but for you, Snake Eater. In my time, there'll be no one else. Crime is the way I fly to you. I'm still in a dream, Snake Eater. Coming when it's ready. Subscribe to any button to start. I'll see you next time. Bye!